Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we're with one of my, I guess, political heroes from way back when, before I moved to Israel. So today we're with Scott Walker. Scott Walker is the former governor of Wisconsin, and he's now the president of Young America's Foundation. And without further ado, Governor Walker, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Shalom, great to be with you as well.
So, Governor Walker, we just finished here where I am near Tel Aviv right now, a 12-day war. President Trump made, I think, an amazing decision to bomb Iran's nuclear program and hopefully take it back significant amount of time. The discussion of how much time is irrelevant of the fact that it was done, and now we're where we are. And at the same time, we see inside the Republican base this sort of, I guess, argument about whether he even should have done it. We hear all this chatter about what it means to be America first, what it means to be MAGA. How do you, as someone who grew up in this movement, the conservative movement, where I guess I grew up also, look at this debate happening within the movement now?
Well, first off, I want to say what President Trump did was brilliant. I said a couple days before that I was on CNN in Washington, D.C., of all places, and they said, well, what do you think he's going to do? There's all sorts of pushback one way or the other. I said, I think where most Americans are at, not just conservatives, not just MAGA, but most Americans are at, is on one hand, we don't want another endless war. We saw that in Iraq. We saw that in Afghanistan. I think people were very understandably frustrated with that. But by the same token, I think overwhelmingly Americans, not just conservatives, do not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. We know that's horrific. That is horrible. And so my prediction was he would find a way to balance those interests. I think what he did with the B-2 bombers is exactly right. He didn't get us into a long, protracted, engaged war, particularly not a ground effort. He sent the B-2s in to send in the bunker busters to deal directly with where the threat was, and that was the capacity for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon to use not only against Israel, but potentially against other allies throughout the world, and in the worst case scenario, even against the United States. We've seen that now for more than 4 decades. I was a kid when Kevin Hermaning, the youngest of the American hostages that was taken in the late 1970s, who was from Oak Creek, Wisconsin. I remember putting yellow ribbons around our front oak tree when we had hostages in Iran for 444 days. We know they are the ultimate evil empire. We know that the funding that I would argue that people like President Barack Obama and his administration gave to Iran not only funded those efforts to try and develop a nuclear weapon, they funded, they're the worst state-funded terrorist organization in the world. They funded Hezbollah, they funded Hamas, they funded the Houthis. These people need to be stopped dead in their tracks. And I think the actions that President Trump took worked, and I think most Americans are with him.
But do you think that it's an X/Twitter phenomena where all these voices are getting ramped up, but then you look at the polls, like 90% of Republicans agree with the action that President Trump took. And even I just saw on Ukraine, where now President Trump is realizing that Putin is not, who is not living up to what he tells him on the phone. And Melania tells him at home, listen, you say something, and then a day later, Putin's bombing somewhere in Ukraine. So he's ramping up the military support through NATO to Ukraine. And you see 80-90% I saw of Republicans agree with the thing. And at the same time, the Twitter feed is all, MAGA's against this. So how are we, it's an internet phenomena, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a few voices. Again, I don't want to undermine the concern that I think is real, even though I think a few of the voices pushing it are taking it to the extreme. But I think there is legitimate field, not only in those of us who consider ourselves part of the Make America Great Again, the conservative movement, which really started with Ronald Reagan, by the way. The original Let's Make America Great Again slogan was Ronald Reagan's 1980 campaign slogan. So even though their personalities are very different, much of what they've done, and for that matter, what they inherited, is very similar. Reagan believed in peace through strength. He believed in America first. But he also wasn't afraid to use the muscle when he needed to, which brought about one of the most peaceful times in the history of the world. I think you're going to see some of the same thing true here. Remember, Putin went into the peninsula in Crimea in the Ukraine under Obama. He did nothing under the first 4 years of President Trump. he not only went in under Biden, I would argue he went in precisely because Joe Biden so screwed up the withdrawal in Afghanistan. That if peace through strength provides a deterrent, the opposite is true, is that weakness opens the door to evil. And so I think Putin in that case said, boy, the United States is weak. They can't even pull out of Afghanistan effectively. They totally screwed that up. And so they knew there would be little or no consequences. I actually think Xi Jinping might have quickly after moved into Taiwan, which is, I think, always been part of their plan, if not for not necessarily the government, but the people of Ukraine who fought back so valiantly. And I think right now, again, I get the sentiment. We don't want to get pulled into another war. We don't want wars that go 10, 20 years. I get people saying, I don't want my kids dying on foreign lands for things we're uncertain about. But I think that's the brilliance of what we saw under Reagan and now repeated again under Trump, which is strategic strikes, building up the military, being tough again, carrying a big stick like Teddy Roosevelt would have said, showing the rest of the world, the evildoers out there, we're not afraid to push back as we're doing against Iran and sending a signal to others. And in the case of Ukraine, the president isn't engaging in a war with Russia. He's selling to NATO the tools that they needed. I thought a long time ago, little things, forgive me, I get worked up over this, but little things like originally Poland was willing to offer fighter jets to Ukraine that they could have used to stop the parade of tanks that were coming in from Russia. But the Biden administration wasn't willing to allow them land at NATO bases because they didn't want to get pulled into a war. Well, a year later, they were totally pulled into it. Had they just done that, it wouldn't have involved U.S. troops. It would have just allowed the tools to stop that from advancing at the very onset. So right now, what he's doing, I think, is sending a clear message. And what I've said all along is read Art of the Deal. Donald Trump negotiates unlike hardly anybody else. Most people negotiate, you're at one end, they're at the other end, you come to the middle. With Donald Trump, he's at one end, you're at the other end. He wants you to come right over by him. Now, he'll move an inch, but he won't move a mile to negotiate. And I think that's the case here. He wants to show Putin that the war needs to end. And if it takes showing the United States is willing to sell to NATO some more arsenal, some more tools of war that can be used for Ukraine to fight back, I think that gets us there.
I actually read Art of the Deal also in English and also in Hebrew, so I have both languages. They translated when Trump won in 2016. They translated into Hebrew. I guess the second thing I wanted to ask you, now that we got the conservative movement, and it is something that people are worried about, but I think it's more of an internet thing than an actual real thing when you even look at the numbers of all the polls. So the second thing is the actual American left, where I think that's even in the polls you see it. So you see, for example, let's just put support for Israel on the line. Most Democrats at this point support the Palestinians over the Israelis. This is in every single poll that's come out over the past year or so, and also the people who are rising up in the ranks, the young guns, so to speak. Where I grew up in New York, Mamdani, he's now probably going to be the next mayor. He refuses to reject the intifada. He doesn't, I guess, he not only that, he's a communist pretty much, I think, which usually communists don't like Israel and all this. They don't like nation states, and Israel's a nation state. And obviously, I feel bad for the people in New York. My father still lives there, so I told him run away. But these are the AOC, Rashida Tlaib. Forgive me if I don't remember anymore. Bernie Sanders, who's like the elder statesman. So, what do you make of the American left today? Is this a fad that'll go by? They're very depressed about that they lost so badly, or should we be concerned in terms of long term? First of all, as people who are who I love America, even though I live here. I think America is the most important country in the world and are obviously as like a moral compass of where Western civilization should go. And when you see how an entire party, one of the two parties, president is going to come either from Republican or Democrats. So at some point they might have a crazy person in the White House. Should we be worried long term?
There's a lot to unpack there. First, maybe I should back up for a second and say, in addition to having been a former governor and being interested in this issue, having been to Israel many a time and being concerned all across the world, I now lead a group called Young America's Foundation. And I only add that because I work with college, high school, and middle school students. And it was interesting, a few years back, um, an individual who leads a family foundation that predominantly gives to Jewish causes here in the United States and to support Israel around the world, actually gave a substantial investment in our work. We're a nonprofit. And he said the reason at the time, it's probably more true today, he said, I realized if I want people to support Israel, if I want people to love Israel, I need young people to love America first. If they love America, if they love what freedom's about, if they love our founding, if they know our history, if they appreciate the good that's a part of being an American, they will in turn want to support and love Israel as well. And conversely, if you hate America, you're probably going to hate Israel and you're going to hate other freedom loving entities. And that is precisely part of your question. I think part of the problem is that too many people in the base of today's Democrat Party seem to almost hate America. And it really does go back. You think socialism, communism, Marxism. So Marxism in its truest sense. If you look, remember years ago here in the United States, the organizers of BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, were on video self-professing that they were Marxist-trained organizers. This wasn't just some group that reacting to what happened in Minneapolis. They had been planning this for some time, and typically, historically around the world, those pushing Marxism, communism, even a lesser sense of socialism, oftentimes tried to do that by pitting one group of people versus another, typically based on class or income. Well, in America, that doesn't work because it doesn't matter what class you're born into. Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama, two very different political folks, but they weren't born into privilege. Didn't go to Ronald Reagan didn't go to an Ivy League school. They weren't born and raised the way you'd expect. A leader wouldn't necessarily be elsewhere in the world. And so in America, whether it's in politics and business and entertainment, you can come from nothing and be top of your profession. And so Marxism typically fails here because we don't have a class-based society. Now the left is coming back again, I think through some of these same Marxist organizers, to try and divide us based on sex and race and gender. And so you've seen that movement. So those radical progressives that have become mainstream in the Democrat Party today, instead of flying the American flag like Democrats did traditionally decades ago, they're out flying the transgender flag. Then it was the Palestinian flag. Then it's now, later, it's like, do they put an Iranian flag up? They can't keep track of where they're at. Whereas still, I think there's a base of Americans, certainly driven by conservatives, but even people in the middle, who still believe in America, who still believe in basic common sense. And so I think there's a shot to get back, particularly as we get close to celebrating our 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the start of this republic. I think there's a chance to do that. And I go back to what I was saying originally, like the work we do at Young America's Foundation. I believe if people appreciate America, they're going to appreciate our strongest ally in the Middle East, and that is the state of Israel.
Yes, and I want to just ask you as a political thing because I'm sitting here in Israel. I visited my father a few times since October 7th. I drove by, my aunt lives near NYU in the Village in Manhattan, which isn't a place where conservatives typically go to, but it's family. So when I drove by, I saw a pro-Palestinian protest. I would say a pro-Hamas protest at this point. But what you see is something very weird. You see a mix of these extreme leftists. They have the nose rings, the pink hair, a lot of them, the even transgender flags. A lot of them are trans themselves, which in a lot of places, especially we've had on a few experts on psychology that explain that it's almost a fad in some of these liberal areas. And with like really tattooed all over, and then with them you have Islamists, Students for Justice in Palestine, and all these other radical Islamist groups. By the way, Mamdani was, I think, the founder of the group in Colombia, and they're together protesting. And it really doesn't make sense in just thinking about it, because I literally have interviewed and worked with organizations that save gay Palestinians from Palestinian society and bring them into Israel so that they don't get killed by their families in the Palestinian Authority. So so when you see this, how do you explain this, like, sort of collective? Maybe it's because there's a mutual enemy that you're like blinded by any just rational thinking that these people, if they had their way, would probably kill you? Like, what's going on behind the scenes, do you
Well, you
think?
just saw this. You just saw this recently. I forget what community. I think it was in California, where a group of radicals, a mix that you just talked about, helps get someone elected who was an outspoken Islamic leader on the city council, in which he voted to ban the pride flag. And one of the outspoken, LGBTQ plus whatever it is, advocates said, "Oh, how could you do this to us?" I'm like, you haven't been paying attention. Just basic research will tell you here. I always thought the transgender for Palestine was one of the most ridiculous. I mean, talk about an existential threat. If you carried that sign in Gaza, be careful. You don't want to go to the top of any buildings, because you're gonna get an exit that isn't the way you came up. And people just don't know it. It is total ignorance. I think, sadly, there are far too many people on the radical left here in America on a whole plethora of issues, not just on this, that are just inconsistent because they trust their feelings, their emotions more than the facts. And so oftentimes these feelings get them into really inherently contradictory positions, which we see here. We try to expose that. Again, I go back to work we're doing at Young America's Foundation last year during the encampments. And we weren't alone, others did this too. I saw other similar videos, but we would send students with cameras to these encampments. And in particular, we have a number of instances where we came up to people with signs that said, "From the river to the sea, Palestine, Palestine shall be free." And we'd ask them, what river and what sea? You would be amazed. Well, maybe you wouldn't be amazed. You follow this, but I think everyday people would be shocked how many of these protesters, not just a citizen on the street, but someone who's there with the sign, couldn't tell you, or the things they said were outright ridiculous. Is it the Mississippi? Is it the Nile? Is it, they just didn't know. And obviously in turn, because they didn't know which sea or which ocean, which sea they're talking about, they also didn't know what that means. And they were, in some cases, were shocked to hear what was actually being implied or outright stated. And so I just think, unfortunately, it's a lot of what you see here. What we fight against, Ben Shapiro, one of our most popular speakers for Young America's Foundation, well known around the world, has a great saying. He says, the facts don't care about your feelings. And we see that routinely, particularly amongst the radical left, which all too often are not only students on American campuses, but more often than not, sadly, the educators, the professors, who are just inconsistent with logic.
By the way, Ben Shapiro just lit, for those who don't know, the torch for the main ceremony for Israel's Independence Day, which was a very big thing here. And all Israelis got to hear him speaking in Hebrew, which was interesting. Um, One thing that I want to ask about Young America's Foundation in the sense of what you see in American universities. So, one of the things that I've seen in Israeli universities is that in the humanities, not in the STEMs. Those are usually normal people. In the humanities, like where I studied, you have a lot of the crazies, and it just is a thing. And there's a sort of competition of who is the biggest victim. So everyone is trying to be a more of a victim than the other person, and so therefore you're also number one always trying to show how much of like how everyone's against you, how you have no chance to climb up the ladder, which is so antithetical to what you explained as America, where everyone is, it's like the exact opposite of what the American foundation believed in when it was founded. And you also have like this like hierarchy of the oppressed. So you have the transgender people of color, and now you'll have, because of the ICE raids, you'll have the like transgender illegal alien or undocumented person, and then after that people of color and gay people, and then the last people are the white straight males. And I think the Jews are like the considered white straight male adjacent. So it's like a whole big thing. And I guess, how do you, as you know, you're not like this giant organization. At the end of the day, there's, I don't know, like maybe millions of students at this point that are going through American universities, churning out all these, propagandists. How do you fight the fact that people need to have agency over their lives. You're going to speak with students, and they're all in the question and answer sessions at Ben Shapiro. You, other people that I see on YouTube, you're being asked, how come everyone's discriminating against me? How can I go like it's such a it's almost like when you go to college, you get hit on the head with a hammer and you're being told you can't do anything. You're screwed for life. You're not going to be anything when you get out, and this whole generation is being taught you're nothing. How do you fight that?
Yeah, sadly, I felt for some time. People ask me often. They say, what school should I send my son or daughter to? And I increasingly, sadly, have to tell them there's only a handful I'd feel confident in. It's why we're active. Other groups like us are active on all the other campuses. But today, if my kids, my youngest will be 30 in a few weeks. I've got a 30 and a soon to be 30 and a 31-year-old. Even since they've been in college just a few years ago, things have changed dramatically, particularly since COVID. But I must say, it's unless you're seeking a profession that requires, like law, medicine, engineering, that requires a degree. I almost say encourage people go to alternatives. Go to a 2-year undergraduate, go to other programs, go into apprenticeships, whatever it might be. Because sadly, and we see it not only in the United States but many places around the world, colleges have become these places of just radical indoctrination, and they're not even succeeding at giving people the skills to go into the professions they want to go to. That said, I still have hope. We do polling of young people all the time. We saw last year in the election that the economy was the top issue, almost 2-1. We asked young people, even again recently since the inauguration, things like, do you think it's fair for someone born a man to compete against women in sports? College students, 2-1, say it's not fair. We asked them questions like, do you think race should be a factor in employment or enrollment in school? Almost 2-1, they say it's not fair, even across different demographics. So it's not just white students who say that, black, Hispanic, other students say that as well, proving that there's, at its core, we still believe in a meritocracy. And so I think the left, historically, for sure on college campuses, but even in the larger political debate, has been really good at trying to intimidate people by trying to make you feel like you're somehow on the fringe, not only as students, but on social media, in traditional media outlets. And in turn, what we find in the polling, it's not on every issue, but on many, many issues, Americans have even young Americans have a much more reasonable position. We just can't yell and scream at them. We have to come at them with not only facts, but do so in a way that plays up to authenticity and fairness, which are two premiums. When we talk about the gender issue is a good example. We teach kids that we work with to say, it's not fair for a 19-year-old girl to swim against a bunch of 9-year-olds any more than it's fair for a 19-year-old man or a 19-year-old who's born a man to now say he's a woman and swim against a bunch of 19-year-old girls. That's just not fair. Or to say with sex change surgery, we don't let kids in America, in any state, even California, doesn't allow minors to get a tattoo without consent from an adult. Why would we allow the same when it comes to sex change? So inherently, people get fairness. We just got to do a better job of making that case. Unfortunately, higher ed, though, has become like a magnet, drawing some of the craziest, most radical, most out of control folks. And we got to fight back with reason and tell it in a way that makes sense to the everyday person.
Yes, I interviewed Bill Ackman not too long ago about Harvard, and he's like, I they haven't it's lost, it's over. Like he's already given up on, and he's giving money to places like University of Austin and all these other places. So he pulled his money out of Harvard. They lost. They have so much money that I don't think they maybe care anymore. But it's good that people should take their money out from Harvard and Columbia and give it to people like you and other universities that are,
The
because in
best
America
thing
that's
that
really
people
big.
Yeah, the best thing to do is your alma mater, school in your community, whatever it might be. If they're not even just, if they're not teaching what you believe in, if they're teaching students to hate you, to hate the things you stand for, America, not just based on freedom, Judeo-Christian values at the core of the founding of this country. If they're teaching young people to hate those things, why would we give them a penny? Not only as donors, but as governors and state lawmakers, as people from the U.S. Department of Education. That's why I love so much of what the Trump administration is doing. They're pushing back and they're going beyond just what you might traditionally think of. Yeah, Harvard's got this multi-billion-dollar endowment, but suddenly now they're saying, oh, foreign students can't come in to Harvard because of how anti-Semitic they are, and how Jewish students aren't safe on those campuses. Well, suddenly you start to hit them where it hurts, because many of the foreign students that come to places like Harvard are paying much, much higher tuition than people in country. And that's what drives their endowments. That's what drives their payroll. You start drying that up, that has like really true long-term consequences.
And it makes you wonder who these people actually are and where they're getting their money from. Like, who is pay? How could so many people have so much money from backtrodden countries to come to Harvard, Columbia, and all these other places, Brown, all these places that cost, for the outside students, cost way more than the American students, who are themselves paying like $60,000 a year. I saw for Columbia, which is here, it's like, it's unbelievable. Just as a political question, when I saw Mamdani, I'm going to Mamdani because he's the poster child as of now, which is amazing. He just met the congressman in Washington. They all said he was so great, and they even said he's not a socialist. He's a small C capitalist, which this congressman said. Um, he won white, rich neighborhoods in the primary. And Cuomo, the moderate, I guess, which is amazing also in and of itself, he won the black and Hispanic neighborhoods. So, do you, and we saw this, by the way, with President Trump also in the last election, where he won an amazing amount of a share of the vote of minorities and only lost, if I'm not mistaken, white women or white, maybe single women, which is, it blows your mind in the sense that we were told that the Republicans were going to lose forever because they could never win with minorities. The whites are becoming a minority in the US. This is what I was taught in Israeli universities, just by people who I guess don't know. Or I think that was the wisdom in America too, that this was what's going to happen. We're going to have a Democrat party. It's going to win forever. And then you see that the crazies are winning with the white college educated people who are being indoctrinated by what you just spoke about, and the minorities, which are hardworking, which want, to live in relative peace. They want a police force that's arresting criminals. He's
Yeah,
defund the police
defund the
person.
police.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So how do you, the changing dynamic where the conservatives are winning the minorities, and the whites who used to be the Republicans or the college educated whites are all moving to become crazy Democrats? How is it
Yeah,
like
it's where you get
you?
the extreme with, and we see it even in my home state of Wisconsin, where it's college educated women and men, particularly as you say single, who are, kind of live in this fantasy world, driven by, just being college a few years ago, buying into all the liberal propaganda, the radical professors and activists and others out there. Once people get into the workforce, once they get married, once they have families, they start to alter a little bit. But overall, you see this really giant shift. That's where the conservative movement has become much more blue collar. The last time it really had those kind of roots nationally was when Reagan was president. We used to call them Reagan Democrats. Today they might be called MAGA. But it's where it's very blue collar, and the white collar, traditional suburban college educated voter has almost got this sense of guilt, and oftentimes these protests you talk about that you'll see are almost overwhelmingly wealthy white trust fund kids who live in the suburbs, who don't really have, well, even this candidate in New York is not far from that. Someone who went to an elite private school whose family's got all this money, uh, they're fine because they didn't really have to worry about it. Whereas working class families like my brother and sister-in-law, who worked jobs that during COVID were considered essential, I think that was really part of the breaking point. You saw then in COVID, again, people like my brother and sister-in-law, one who works at a gas station franchise as a manager there, the other works at Home Depot selling appliances. They're typical black, white, Hispanic, doesn't matter. Blue collar workers had to work during COVID. They were upset at the government, particularly those who had kids, trying to figure out, where do I send my kids because I'm working and they don't have school open, versus the white suburban college educated families who were well enough to do that. They stayed at home. They didn't have the commute. They were wealthy enough that each of their kids had a computer. They were just fine letting the government do whatever they wanted. And so you've seen this shift. I don't know if it's going to be permanent or not, but it's an interesting shift But I think it goes to the core of people who've had to work, who generally are caring about others, but they believe this is the big debate we've even had at the federal level with this latest legislation the president signed, included provisions that said if you're an adult, if you're over 18 and under 65, and you are physically and mentally capable of working, you're not getting Medicaid unless you're working a set amount of time. And the left went crazy. Oh, you're kicking people off of healthcare. No, there's a fundamental sense, actually goes all the way back to King Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, where he's like, in the end, all these things he tried, nothing satisfied except for the idea of finding joy in the toil of your labor, doing under the sun. It's doing what God calls you to do. And I think that's at the heart of this, that there's a big time shift. Before they were a little suspect, the left was really good at saying, oh, Republicans are only
Racist.
care about the rich. The reality is, I think working class people have figured out that no, conservatives just want to get the government out of your life. They just want you to be able to live your life, go to work, do your job, start a company if that's what you want to do, be together with your family, worship where you please, and not have to deal with all this other crap. Conversely, the liberals, the radicals, they want to tell you everything to do, what you can do and what you can't do. And the list of what you can't do is growing by the day.
And there and we look, you can look across the pond from you and the UK, where they're putting people in prison for things you can't say, not only do. I just want to
Thank God for the Declaration of Independence. I mean, you wonder, think about how awful it would be to live in I mean, King Harry now live, or King, former Prince Harry lives not too far from the Reagan Ranch, which we run in California. And it's been interesting watching him talking about, not getting this whole freedom of speech stuff. And I'm like, of course, if you're a monarch, you think the rights come from the monarch. On July 4th, 1776, we made this amazing promise to every current and future American that your rights come from God. They come from the Creator. They don't come from the monarch or any dictator or any president. The responsibility of the government here in America is to protect those rights, living in a republic, not a democracy, where even the smallest of minorities have their rights protected under the Constitution. And that's just so inherently important. And I hope as we get closer to next year's July 4th date, that more people, not only in America, but around the world, will look at what the founding is about. The left is really good at saying, oh, some of the founders were awful because of slavery, or the Constitution was bad because it was this compromise with the southern states. What they forget is that the closest to perfection we have was the Declaration of Independence. Despite Thomas Jefferson's personal background, the Declaration said we're all created equal. Our Creator gives us rights, not the least of which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's inherently the responsibility of the government to do that. Years later, the U.S. Constitution was ratified, was approved, but the elements of that didn't start out perfect because there had to be a compromise. But what they did is they set the table up so that years later, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, the 19th Amendments all added back in these rights that were essentially declared all the way back on July 4th, 1776. We've been on the path towards a more perfect nation. But the left loves to point out the flaws along the way instead of saying all this is about the promise of America and really a promise around the world.
Right, but I think they like doing it because, like you said, they like not liking America. I think that's like it's their like they always like to show where America or where Israel or where the Western countries are imperfect, and they just slide their hands and not look at any other of the societies in the world. So they'll only look at like, oh, these countries have a great culture. Never mind that they kill all the minorities and everything, and you can't say anything, they'll be put in jail. They'll never mention that because that's for some reason America or whoever's fault too. So it's like you're always looking for where you're bad and always glossing over where other cultures are bad. And when you do that, I have to say I don't take you seriously. So that's why I just
Oh, you're
wanted.
totally right. You mentioned New York. I mean, if that city votes for this crazy new mayor, you're going to see it head down the path towards Venezuela. People should look. Anybody who's interested in the world about where things go, if America goes down the path of socialism, communism, Marxism, Look at Venezuela. That country in the last few years has got the largest refugee crisis in the world. And it's not because of a flood or a natural disaster. It's not because of a bomb or a war going on. It's because socialism has devastated one of the most prosperous nations in the world, rich with oil and other natural resources. They have so ruined that country that people have just flown out to other parts, whether it's Colombia nearby or other places in
or even America.
America or United States.
Yeah. And you're kicking them out. They're the members of the gangs, which is unbelievable that they were allowed in. But I want to just say one thing about myself. We spoke about before the recording about me being losing my eyesight 4 or 5 years ago. Israel is I would say, a welfare state. Even though we started off in almost communism, we're moving more towards a market system. There were reforms. There still are a lot to do, but I think we're still in not a good place on that issue. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because you mentioned the need to work. And when I lost my eyesight, I was working at a newspaper, like I still am, and I was called into like this committee of, I guess, the equivalent of the Social Security, of the benefits in Israel. And I want to tell you this because maybe you can use this in your speeches. And they said to me, okay, you're going to have full benefits, but only if you stop working. So if you want the full benefits, you need to not make a salary so that you can be eligible to make the government money from the government. And the money from the government, it was almost like a half of the salary. And so said to them, I'm not taking the money. I'm going to continue working, as I'm maybe not be able to see so well, but I can still do things with my life. I'm still a young person. I have a full life ahead of me. And then I sent letters to because I'm a journalist, so I know some of the people in the Social Security equivalent, I guess, of Israel. And they said, what do you want from us? That's what the government, and that's how we're supposed to work. We need to help people. I said, you're doing the opposite. You're making people be not working. And then I opened a WhatsApp group with people who have my illness. And almost all of them have left their jobs. A number of them have become alcoholic. A number of them have divorced their wives, and their families have been, destroyed in terms of family unit. And it's a lot of it is because they were incentivized not to work and to stay at home. And someone who stays at home all day will not have any meaning in their life, and it's a very bad thing. And so it's something that people in America should, when the debate is happening, it's always like, oh, we need to help the people who can't help themselves, the people who are disabled. But being disabled doesn't necessarily mean, like, I'm disabled and I park, my wife, when she drives with me, parks in disabled parking. But that doesn't mean that I can't do something with my life. It's such a defeatist
Exactly. Well, you're
attitude.
uniquely able. That's what I was
Yes.
used to say when I was governor. You have unique characteristics that don't involve your eyesight, but involve other things that are enhanced because of that change. Other people have. I had when I was governor. I met a young woman in a program we helped with, where she had very acute autism, and we helped place her through an internship when she went on to work there at a hospital where she sterilized surgical equipment. So with autism, particularly acute autism, people really cling towards repetition. There's repeating the same. Well, in her case, it wasn't just we didn't just find something for her. That was something that she thrived on, that she wanted, that made her life better doing that. You or I, others might be bored to tears after doing that the first 100 times. She craved that. And so that actually gave her a unique ability that other people thought was a disability. And so that to me is part of it is, and I know there's a lot of well-intentioned people who say we're going to help people, but precisely to your point, you help people by helping them do things that add value to their life and to the lives around them. It may be adjusting things. We used to call it, in Wisconsin, we got rid of what we called the benefit cliff, meaning people would make a certain amount of money, particularly parents that had kids, and then if they made a penny more, a dollar more, they'd lose all their benefits, and it'd be this cliff. And so we said we got to eliminate the cliff, and then we said instead of hitting that mark, which was a huge disincentive to take a better job, to make more money, to take a pay raise or a promotion, we said, well, we're going to ease that off. So if you're on assistance, you get to a certain point where there used to be a cliff. we'll just take away an equivalent amount to what you're making. So long term, you're better off striving for more, better work, promotions, better hours, whatever it might be. But sadly, there's so many on the left who think, oh no, we can't do that. My theory is, personally, I wish this wasn't true. I know there are some well-intentioned, but I think there are many people on the left who want people, who want individuals to be beholden to the government. It's why they push government assistance like this. It's why they push for apartments over home ownership, because people who can own their own property, who control their own destiny, are much, much less likely to give their support to the government just blindly, as opposed to those who depend on them to get by.
I want to ask you two more questions, two more topics, because I think number one is about, I write in an economic newspaper, a financial paper here in Israel. And one of the things we've been talking about, I saw you also on CNN a few times and a few other places that you spoke about this since Donald Trump was elected president, the whole tariff topic. So we were in Israel, one of the countries, when it was the Day of Liberation. We were on the thing, on the big board that he's very good at all this props and stuff. So, but we were on that board. The numbers as we understand it here, were a bit off. It turned out that it was made up of the trade deficit also, so it was a little bit hard to understand. But the tariffs were supposed to be, I think, 20 something percent here. But now we're negotiating, and hopefully Israel right away said we're going to take off all the tariffs. That was like, I think we were the first country in the world that said that, which was I was okay. So what? But I guess my question is, do you think it's a negotiating ploy by the president saying, I'm going to go all in on tariffs in order to get other countries to take off their tariffs? Or as he sometimes himself says, I love tariffs. It's the most beautiful word in the English dictionary. And there seems to be in the administration some people like Lutnick and others that like tariffs. They've even said this in congressional testimony. It almost seems like the tariffs have an inherent value in it of it themselves. Or Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who understands, I think, that the tariffs are a tool to get to free trade. So who do you think President Trump listens to, and what is his natural instinct?
I think for a guy who's a global businessman, he wants to do business all around the world. I spoke to him during his first term, the day he went up to Canada to the G7, right before, remember, he left that meeting early to go into North Korea and talk to the Rocket Man, as he called it at this time. But what got lost because of all that attention on North Korea was he made an offer the day I talked to him on the way up there to all the other leaders of the 6 other industrial nations. And he said, I'll get rid of all of our tariffs if you do the same. And I think that was a genuine offer. Now, of course, they didn't take him up on it. He kind of called it bluff on it. But I think his goal, personally, I believe his goal is, and I believe it should be, to get as close to zero tariffs as possible. When people say, oh, these tariffs are awful. So, well, there already were big tariffs before all this. It was just tariffs from the other countries on the United States. So I think it is a negotiation tool. I wouldn't call it a ploy or anything. I'd say it's a tool. He understands as part of negotiations, you got to show some muscle. You got to push back, particularly see it in the way he's reacted to China and their tariffs and just keeping up in the ante. But I think in the end, if they know he's serious, they know he's not going to back down. They know he's not just playing around with this, that he's willing to see this through if need be. I think that actually adds to a good negotiation position. Having said that, I still think his long-term goal is to get to either zero or as close to zero as possible, because that's the best environment for us. Then if there's a deficit, it's on us in the United States. And in some cases, smaller countries, there's always going to be a deficit just because they only have so much capacity to buy, and we have almost a limitless capacity to purchase with our size and our economic status here in the United States. So I think as close to zero as we can get is the right approach. Yeah, there are a couple people in that administration who think we should go all the way back to pre the income tax in 1913 and just have tariffs fund the federal government. I think that's a bad idea. I think in the end, I think instinctively the president understands that. But there's no doubt he's not just negotiating. He's willing to stick with them if the other major countries don't follow through. So I hope others take the lead that Israel provided, or follow the lead, I should say, of Israel, and offer to get to no tariffs. Because in the end, that's great. Then the consumer wins, the world wins, and Americans just got to make sure we find ways to be highly productive, which we have in the past.
But aren't you worried that if in the meantime you're having an election, the midterms, and if the inflation goes up because of him negotiating through this way, the Republicans are, and I'll tell you what, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm in Israel. I live here now in Israel. I think I can vote still in elections in America, but I'm not sure I do. But my point, I live in New York anyway, so my vote, I think I'm in Hakeem Jeffries district still. So I have no, my vote doesn't count. But my point is that the Democrats are really crazy. And so if you give them a win, you're actually hurt, even if long term you're looking to do good, you're endangering the country by going down this path that might work and it might not work. And if it doesn't work, even in the short term, and you get higher inflation because of the tariffs, it's a dangerous move, right? Politically, even.
Yeah, I think there's three key things that conservatives need to focus on yet this year if Republicans are going to be successful in the midterms, which is always a challenge regardless of who the president is. It's three T's: taxes, trade, and terrible government spending. So the tax cuts, thank goodness, we saw the bill the president signed on July 4th. That not only made the tax cuts extend into the future, got rid of other things like taxes on tips and overtime and things like that, but also avoided what would have otherwise been a massive tax increase next year. So that was the biggest concern, was you got to pass something to extend the tax cuts so there's this big tax increase. Accomplished, number one. The terrible government spending, the third thing I mentioned, they're going through the process now. We just saw part of it in a rescission bill with PBS and NPR and other spending. But I think to the extent that they can drive down, some of the things that Doge under Elon Musk push for, codify those, make those permanent, make those changes, that'll help drive down government spending. And really much of the inflation we've seen in the last few years is because of a massive increase in spending at the federal level here in the United States. The third is the middle thing I talked about. That's trade. Tariffs, but really trade in general. And my hope is that this gets worked out by Labor Day. I've been saying this for the last several months. Right. Is if you can get it done by Labor Day, keep the pressure on, be strong, take a little grief between now and then, really from when it started before April 2nd on. But don't extend that into if we're going to next year in the fall and we still have tariff uncertainty, we've got real problems. If they can get most of those trade deals worked out, or at least announced by Labor Day, I think you're going to see a tremendous response, not only from the stock market in terms of the economy, but more importantly in terms of consumer confidence. If people are going to feel certain again, they're going to go out and buy things, they're going to build homes, they're going to buy businesses, employers are going to hire more people. I think all of that bodes well going into 2026.
Okay, lastly, I want to talk to you about something that you were sort of a hero of mine. If you remember as governor, you remember. If I remember, you remember. As governor, you took on the
I'm
unions.
25 years younger than Joe Biden, so I still remember everything.
Exactly. So as governor, you took on the unions in your state in a bunch of different issues, and I remember there was one bill where they went crazy ballistic on you. You became, I think, they're like number one target in the U.S. Um, for sure as governor in the U.S. I remember in your capital there was these. They stormed the Capitol. So the January 6th was there was a January 6th before January 6th, but the left did it, so no one talked about it. And they like stood there and sung songs, and they wouldn't leave, and you were like hounded all over the place. And I have to say that, and you were almost, because I'm so free market, you were almost a hero of mine. Almost, you're probably a hero of mine at that point. And the Republican Party of today is not there anymore. They're very friendly with the unions. President Trump refuses to cut the entitlements. He explicitly said no touching Medicare, no touching Social Security, and all these things. And I think politically it's probably smart because the American people aren't there. They're not ready to take these cuts on. They're not ready to really fight the unions at this point in a way that should be done. And so, do you feel do you feel disappointed that that's where the thing nationally the Republican Party has gone, or how do you look at it?
No, I still, one, I'm very proud that our reforms are still intact. What we really did more than just unions was take power out of the hands of the big government union bosses, the special interests, and put them into the hands of the taxpayers, the hardworking taxpayers and the people they elect to run their state and local governments. And that's really what the shift did. I always said I'm pro worker, I'm just not pro union boss. And so here in Wisconsin, if you're a great worker, you don't have to wait for seniority, you don't have to wait for tenure. You can advance throughout your career and see your wages go up as your productivity, as your value goes up, whether you've been here 6 months or 6 years or 25 years. I really think that's the market at play. And you're right. I was enemy number one in the country. They first tried to intimidate me through not for a couple hours, even a couple of days. For a month, they occupied our state capitol. About 100,000 people descended around our Capitol Square and in the building
From the whole
itself,
country, there was a lot of
all over
outside
the country.
agitators. Yeah.
Yeah, we saw the signs and banners and jackets. So I'm not just, it's not hearsay. We could see the names from Nevada, New York, Chicago, Washington, Los Angeles, you name it. We didn't back down. We won. We were unintimidated. And then they tried to recall me. I'm the first governor in American history to ever win a recall election. They spent about 100 million against us compared to the 15 million I'd spent the first time. And ironically, we not only won, we won with more votes and a higher percentage of vote than we did the first time. So what people saw in Wisconsin and the closest to the battleground states was that our reforms worked, and they rewarded us for that and elected me again even after that recall election. So yeah, there's some things I'd like to see different at the federal, sure, but I do think the Doge and the pushback on spending has been remarkable. The reducing of the size of the federal government workforce, I think a number of the other changes, and probably most importantly, I see governors all across the country, maybe not quite going as far as we did, but enacting many of these same reforms and putting the taxpayers back in charge. I think long term, that's the right answer. And I still think you're seeing that done, some of it being done at the federal level, but much more aggressively being done at the state and local.
And I have to say that whenever in Israel I get into arguments with ministers and everything on this stuff, you are one of the examples that I give that it could also be politically convenient to do it. Meaning, not convenient because you're going to have these people going after you, but that the public rewards people that they think are working for them and not for all these groups. And they're always outsized also in the way they present themselves, a little bit like what we spoke in the beginning. They have a large presence in places that are very seen, but the person who works hard and goes home and has a family, he's not protesting. He wants to just get on with his life, and he's not going to be going to your offices and bothering you, but he's the person you should be working for. And that's, yeah, so I keep on telling them, but no one listens to me. And but hopefully one day it'll happen here. We have Netanyahu in 2003 made a lot of reforms to welfare and all this other stuff, but he lost. So other in direct opposite from you, the Likud, after Netanyahu did his reforms, got 12 seats and became the head of the almost lost even the biggest party in the opposition. And I've heard Netanyahu say, "What do you want from me? I lost politically, and I understand that I can't do a lot of stuff." So, because I used to work in the Likud, so that was one of our conversations we've had all the time. Like, how far do you go? How can you win politically in a country that started off as a socialist, communist place? It's very difficult. But America has a creed, a capitalist, and um, you know, a creed of entrepreneurship that I think Israel should emulate. The high tech sector here does. So I really do use you as an example, and I hope that's okay with you.
Totally. I love it.
So thank you so much, Governor Scott Walker, for being with us. Total pleasure. Um, Again, the things you've done as governor and now in the universities are something that we should all aspire to do. What you did, it showed true courage, I think, because politicians want to be elected again, and the safe path is always not to do anything. So thank you so much for everything you've done and all the work you continue to do.